Well, I'm just really grateful to be here with such an incredible group of leaders and humans. Like, I'm feeling very optimistic across so many areas, having listened to the amazing conversations today, and I'm sure all of you are feeling the same. And I'm also just grateful that we're like 45 minutes away from drinks, you know? So it's gonna be a great evening, I have no doubt. You know, the world is changing, and it's changing very quickly, and I think with the amount of time that we spend at work, that's where we feel it most deeply. Technology is changing. We've talked a lot about AI and how that's changing both how we think about what work will continue to exist and also how work is getting done. And the title of our session is based on the premise that workforce learning could be the new R&D. And that implies innovation, it implies growth and being on offense. But all too often, I think we aren't on offense when it comes to learning, whether for ourselves or for our teams. So I just want to go around the horn. You know, we've got Nissan Stadium over there, so I'm going to ask a lot of football questions probably. But imagine that you are the offensive coordinator. And what are you doing well in terms of workforce upskilling? And what do we need to improve? We'll start with Dave.
All right. How's our offensive line? So I think the good news is that the world of corporate L&D seems to be mobilizing in like a really serious way. So like stuff has changed. The conversation is not the same. The people who show up in the meetings are not the same. There is budgetary pressures right now, like there is across the rest of the world, but like the world is really changing pretty fast. This is actually the first time Kat and I have shared the stage with me wearing a Degreed jersey and Kat not.
It's really nice that he's in the hot seat and I'm asking the questions.
So for those who don't know, Kat was Degreed's president for a number of years and recently stepped away to become a venture partner. And I recently returned to Degreed. But one of the unique things about having stepped away from Degreed and then having been brought back is that you know, often we kind of become nose blind when you show up to these events every couple of months and the conversation is just kind of evolving. But I had stepped away and then I stepped back. And so there's this sort of like high contrast. Where was the conversation when I left and where is the conversation when I got back? I'd say one of the things that is happening and is a very good sign, under my first tenure at Degreed, we have some of the world's largest companies as clients, but we would be selling to the CLO. And it was very rare. I think it happened maybe half dozen times in 6 years that there was ever another chief level executive in the conversation. And since having come back, it is now more regular than not that when we show up, not only is the CLO there, but the CHRO, the Chief Talent Officer, the Chief People Officer, and occasionally like a COO or like CTO, or occasionally like a CFO. And as organizations are moving to skills-based organizations, it's no longer just a learning agenda. It's bringing the entire executive kind of group together to envision what is this strategy and how are we going to think about it and execute on it. And I think that's, you know, we've got better coordination across the whole team. So.
Yeah, hi, I'm Diane. So I run the EdAdvisory business at Bright Horizons. And while I'm not necessarily new to education, I am new to this notion of treating education as a benefit. And the clients that we work with, right, we're putting education benefit programs in place for them. And I would agree, actually, with the observation around, like, while there is budgetary pressure, there's more money being spent on reskilling, upskilling, and I think, you know, organizations like ours have to you don't have to work very hard to convince companies they need to be investing in this space. They know they do, right? And inevitably, what they're asking for help on is, how do I do it well? How do I ensure that I'm getting the return on that investment that's going to help me address a lot of the ambiguity that I'm facing? What is AI going to mean for our business, and how do I ensure that I have a workforce that can be agile and adapt to that? So that's something I think, is relatively speaking, again, when you think about the history of how much has been spent in workforce learning historically, we're spending more than ever before, which is a good thing. I would say that it's only the most innovative clients of ours who are having a holistic conversation about it, right? So it is, where you're talking about creating an ecosystem around an individual learner to set that person up for success. So is the line manager, for example, involved in terms of and invested in ensuring that that working learner is going to succeed? Are you leveraging the programming that exists across the company to sort of reinforce those messages, whether it's programming through ERGs or inclusion groups, and are you also reflecting it in performance reviews, in how you compensate people, right? And I think right now, we still see this being a little bit of an isolated instance where, as a frontline worker, I am highly motivated to put myself in a position where I can earn more money than I did yesterday. So that's why I am, working my butt off to do classes after work to try and get myself in that position. And, that's still the lion's share of what we're expecting from workers, that they're going to put the time in, that they're going to make all of the sacrifices, right? David and I actually were at a conference earlier this week talking about whether or not companies should, they should compensate folks for the time it takes to upskill themselves. That kind of holistic approach, I think, is where we have a lot of work to do, to say, what are best practices to really ensure that we're setting working learners up to actually achieve everything that they want to achieve.
So, hello, I'm Stephen Bailey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ExecOnline. And so we focus on leadership development. So we're the first and only SaaS platform for leadership development, so we get kind of a unique perspective. I agree that there's a lot of energy around what we should do, and the fact that there's more money that needs to flow to development. I would say at the leadership level, however, there's still a big question of how do we deploy that capital effectively to achieve outcomes. And I would kind of put it in three categories. I mean, we sort of, as we say to our clients, we're in a learning economy, and your competitive advantage is going to be determined by whether you can learn faster than the pace of change. And if you're going to deploy development resources effectively, it's kind of three themes that we see as lacking now, right? One is moving from an episodic mindset around development to a continuous mindset. So the idea that you can just learn in these discrete intervals, maybe years apart, and keep up with the pace of change is outmoded. The second, and this is really where it comes to getting stakeholders aligned, you have to be able to show impact in a different and kind way. And so to David's earlier point, another person who's often in these conversations now is the CFO. And as more money flows, the expectations rise. It's not that different than sort of when marketing was revolutionized and there was lots of money flowing, but then the question was, okay, how do you measure it? And then the third is really democratization. This is a time when you can't, especially with leadership development, which traditionally we're going to invest in a handful of folks, and then everybody else is kind of left to fend for themselves. If you're a high potential or you're a succession candidate, sure, we'll spend. But if you're 97% of the rest of the leadership population, kind of figure it out. And I think that has changed. And organizations recognize you need broad-based leadership capability. If you're not investing in a broad-based way, you're not going to be successful. I'd say what gives me optimism is that there are some really progressive companies that are kind of leading the charge here. Actually, Citi is a great partner, and it is thinking more progressively about how you accomplish that continuous, measurable, democratized access. But there's still, I think, a long way to go.
Completely agree. Thank you. I'm Peter Fox. I look after global functions and operations and technology learning at Citi, which basically means about 130,000 people in the organisation. We provide the skills, learning resources and things for them to enable them to perform for us. I think that the offensive line question, I always feel like we're miles behind everyone, but then I realise that this is the first time I've been on a stage where we're actually using all three vendors that are sitting next to me. So I don't know that lands quite. We're probably further ahead than what we think we are, but I mean, we're going to talk about it a little bit today, but everything that's happening around Gen AI and being in a global regulated industry, it's a moment, it's a big moment for us to either really, really succeed and get a competitive advantage on other banks and other organisations, both in what we provide to our clients, but in also the ways that we attract and develop our talent. And for those that were in the room yesterday, I said this will be one of the few times in my 20 plus years in the learning and edtech space where I plan on sharing less about what we're doing as it relates to Gen AI and the things that we're going to develop in-house, because I do truly believe that we have about a year or two window where we can really get a huge jump on others. Whereas in the past, I'd be a member of the Degreed CAB Client Advisory Board, and I would sit next to Bank of America, and we would sit next to the other banks, the many banks that you have, and we would happily share what we could do, because the development of the Degreed platform was going to be a leveler for all of us. It wasn't going to give one any competitive advantage over the other. It was helping all of us. Whereas now in the Gen AI space, I think we can be doing things in-house at Citi that will push us ahead of the others. At least that's the hope.
Competitive edge. I like it. Elbows are out. Wow.
Luckily, there are no other banks on the panel.
I'm trying to think if I want to go with the flow or if I just want to, shock you all with how I ask my questions. It's a constant debate. But, Stephen, you focus on leaders. What are they doing well? Diane mentioned, they are responsible for a lot of creating the environment for, those that report to them, also for their peers. What do you see them doing well? What do you wish they would do better?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is, one of the kind of questions that we ask our leaders, and, we get tens of thousands of data points on this a year, is kind of what are the things you need the most from your organization? And I mean, for years, the number one was more resources, not surprisingly, right? Everyone wants more resources. In the last year to 18 months, the resource in particular that's kind of bumped up has been learning, right? And it's at the top of the list now. I need more learning resources from my organization. And so I think leaders are recognizing that there's a lot of change that they don't feel confident they're keeping pace with. And so in terms of, I think, what they're doing well, I think the first thing they're doing is sort of recognizing the need to increase the pace at which their organizations, the people they're responsible for themselves, need to be kind of upskilled. I would say the second thing is generally, if we really think about how much change has happened in organizations, I like to say it's like a once in 100-year event every year now, right? The fact that we've been able to keep the trains on the tracks for organizations, right, through hybrid work, through economic volatility, through geopolitical uncertainty, is a testament to the change capabilities of leaders. Are there things they could be doing better? Absolutely. But are they doing pretty well right now? I would say generally, given all that change, if you would have said overnight, everyone is going to work from home for a couple of years and we'll see how companies do, it's been pretty impressive. And so change typically was taught from a change management perspective. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and now it's continuous. A couple of areas where we see opportunity for leaders. One is around communications. So as you think about the broad range of stakeholders that one needs to communicate with now, even if it's a buying decision that has more people involved than ever before, if it's sort of more cross-functional collaboration in hybrid environments, different channels than you're used to. Leaders have to communicate in a wide variety of different ways, and doing that effectively to the right constituencies in the right way is something we see that rises to the top. The other is decision-making in the midst of uncertainty with imperfect data points. So humans have a really difficult time understanding that like a 60% chance of something doesn't mean that you're right if it happens and wrong if it doesn't. It means there's a 6% chance. And so how do you make these decisions when there is no 100% answer is another thing that a lot of leaders are grappling with.
So I'm a VC now, so I get to be the one who asks, can't you just do more with less? Like, you should grow faster and you should spend less, and it's a trope, but it's true. And we see the public markets requiring the same. Tech companies over the past year have been required to be more efficient, and they've shown they can continue growing and be efficient. And I think that is casting a broad requirement of organizations to do the same. So Peter, I didn't go to you first. He made me promise, so he's coming second. How are you having that conversation inside of Citi? Because I'm sure many times throughout the year you get asked, can we do more without hiring a ton? Can you? And how are you, if so?
Thanks for not going to me first. We are approaching this big moment of change with a different mindset than we've had at Citi in the past. So in the past, obviously, everyone tends to work functionally, be aligned to their function, which creates silos, which means it takes longer to move anything along, and you have multiple objectives, which means you don't really know which is your North Star that you're driving towards. What we're doing differently right now in this space is we've actually started 4 key projects to spin up cross-project groups. So literally grabbing people from the various functions and rolling them into agile projects for all kinds of things, not just technology related. And it's helping us to do a couple of things. One, create a better culture of being prepared to try things and fail fast. It's a really hard balance for a bank. It's easy for us to say we want to fail fast, we want to do it. In a highly risk-averse environment, we're trying to break through that culture. So that's one of the key things it's doing. And then I think that the other thing that we as a learning function are trying to do at the moment to speed this up is to actually scare people a little bit. Everyone's talking about what's going to happen with our jobs and with AI, and if you've read the news, you'll know that Citi's going through also its biggest org change in the history of the bank right now. We blew up the whole org structure, and BCG are working layer by layer through the org to create a whole new business. With all of that going on at the same time, we are hoping that we'll come out the other side as a place that makes good risk-adjusted decisions in a faster way. Now, whether we get through this and do that, ask me that in 12 months.
One of the panels, I think it was 2 ago, and I forget the name of the man who said it, but he said, embrace the change and manage the fallout, and that's very much what I hear. And it's also so critical to a good R&D in any innovation function. You're going to fail, and learning how to fail is such a vital ingredient to that.
Yeah, totally. And we're trying to figure out how genuinely to reframe the fear into excitement. And particularly in this Gen AI space, I truly believe that you have to have that fear moment to understand how transformational this moment is in time. People are saying it's like the start of the internet. I think it's way bigger than that. This is a way bigger moment.
And Diane, how do you marry that with what you heard, earlier in the week, where, on one hand we're hearing, could we compensate people for the very effort of learning and growing, and then we hear this pressure of excitement and move faster, do more. Like how do you think about the dichotomy between those two? Because that creates an interesting pressure for organizations at large, but leaders and the employee.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think actually what Peter's sharing about what's happening at Citi and the approach that they're taking at Citi is, and actually the fact that he does business with all of the people sitting on this panel is evidence of, an everything approach, right? As opposed to saying, we're just going to invest in educating executives, or we're just going to invest in educating our frontline, or we're just going to invest in this kind of education. But instead say, we need non-degree programs, we need degree programs, we need certifications, we need, boot camps, we need absolutely everything. And I think that's increasingly the kind of conversation that we're having, because the truth is, like, when we talk about AI, most businesses, don't actually know how they're going to be using AI. They have ideas. I mean, I'll just speak for myself and like running the EdAdvisory business. I have ideas about where we're going to start, and actually have already started thinking about innovating and using AI in certain parts of what we do. But the truth is, we're just getting our feet wet. Most of the world is still just getting its feet wet. We're just beginning to understand. So when you then ask an organization, how are you planning for how AI is going to change your organization and what that means for your workforce? They're like, I don't know. Like, all I know is it's going to change, and what people are doing now is going to be different than what I need them to be able to do 2 years from now and 5 years from now. So, what we're helping them with is trying to put them in a position of, okay, let's create a programmatic approach to ensuring that you are meeting every potential learner wherever they are, right? And I think historically, most companies have taken the approach of, we want to invest in our hypo people, for example, right? As opposed to saying, nope, we need to create a program that ensures every single employee potentially it has an opportunity to learn and advance themselves. And that may mean, a senior executive who's doing a course on AI, and that may mean a frontline worker who's trying to get their, patient care technician certification at a hospital, right? And it's everything in between. And I think that's increasingly what we're seeing. And I think the most innovative organizations are really kind of leaning into that.
I saw Dave had a thought. Maybe you did or maybe you didn't, but I know him well enough to know that there was a thought that crossed his mind.
Which thought at which moment? Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So first, listening to Peter, who 3 vendors and one sort of corporate up here on stage. I actually didn't know that we were all vendors of Citibank. And so I thought Degreed was the special one up on stage. And, so you said it's representative of an and strategy. Apparently Peter is just, easy to do business with. When I hear, Peter talk, the other thought was just simply, my wife is the biggest Hugh Jackman fan in the world, and we went and saw him in Music Man. And whenever I listen to Peter, I just think, this is Hugh Jackman incarnated, but he went into corporate learning instead of into acting. And, I don't know what GSV is paying you to rep that vest on stage, but, you make that vest look good, and you make corporate learning look good.
We need the hat, though. They didn't pay him enough. He needs the hat, too.
Yeah.
They're not paying me, and I don't think they're paying the heating bills either. That's why I put it on.
It's, and this is what Kat gets for not actually asking me a real question. Just what are you thinking, Dave? So,
I got more.
Stream of
don't
thoughts.
worry, there's more.
But, to maybe add something a little more productive to it. I think, Diane hinted at it, but I think a radical shift is coming. So it was part of skills-based organizations. The pressure on skills is building. Michael Moe's presentation, he had the rate at which technology is scaling is outpaced the rate at which humans can learn. That's what's creating the immense pressure. There's some really interesting research. We did just come from a session at Harvard Business School, and we saw some of this, but there's actually some Gallup and Amazon did research. This is frontline workers. But if you give people training and expect them to do it on their own, if you give people training, give them work hours, if you pay for the training versus if you expect them to pay for the training, and the only combination that created wage gains was if you pay for the training and administer it on paid working hours. Every other combo actually correlated with negative wage gain. And that's like this moment. So what that says is like, we're gonna have to start paying more for skills. You're gonna have to pay in time, you're gonna have to pay in dollars. But very soon, I do believe this is coming, you will actually just literally pay. Meaning, today, if we were to log into every single one of y'all's payroll system, people get paid essentially on their job title and then geography, to a lesser extent. And I think, 3 years from now, when we convene in, let's do Salt Lake City. This Nashville event was great, but we're gonna rep Utah. So 3 years from now, when we do this in Salt Lake City, and we log into all of your ADP, you are going to have a designation of what you are paying for every skill. Like, we are going to start paying, literally, for skills. And there's an incredible, I shared this at the other event, so Diane will have already heard this, but there's a story, Washington Post has covered over time, the story of Marlin Steel, which is this, a steel company. They made the wire baskets for Einstein bagels. So like a very low intelligent steel product. And they have this story of the skills matrix, which is there's 135 micro skills and every employee. And they put this on a corkboard, bulletin board on the shop floor. And for every single one of those 135 micro skills, if they up-leveled, they would get a micro raise. So their hourly wage would go up by 5 cents, 3 cents, 2 cents. And you could be a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 in 135 micro skills. And it's a story of transformation of them going from being this low intelligent, making wire baskets for Einstein bagels to high intelligent, like weapons grade steel products. And this transformation of employees going from making typically minimum wage and sharing all these success stories of employees now making over 6 figures, buying homes, sending kids to college. And the whole transformation was driven by micro raises given against upskilling. And I think that is just like a incredible story of the transformation that is coming to the entire economy, broadly to our organizations. It is insane. It is insane that, at Citibank, it'll be literally true that you guys probably have thousands of people in the same job title. In some job titles, tens of thousands of people in the same job title who are essentially getting compensated uniformly, but of course those people don't have a uniform mix of skills. And there is an inefficiency and an insanity in the fact that, but we pay them uniformly. And we're gonna get to the world where you will pay those people, there will be discrimination in pay based on the discerning of skills. And I should get paid more if I mobilize myself and learn, in this moment, generative AI. If I learn, any number of things, Ruby on Rails. Just if I engage and learn it, I should get paid more than the person to my left or person to my right. And so I think that world's coming here quick.
Well, I'll be a little provocative. I imagine there's probably like thought bubbles on top of people who says like, am I gonna get wine? Is it too early to get like a stiff drink? What will people think? So I'll sort of throw out a little bit of a counter, which is to say that, what we see is that you don't necessarily have to pay people for development, but there does need to be a very strong personal value proposition. So a lot of the mistake that companies make is when you go out with messaging around development, and we often find, L&D confounded, we've invested in these resources, why isn't anyone using them? The companies that get the best utilization are companies that make it about the learner as opposed to about the company. And if someone sort of understands, okay, here's why, I know I need to learn. I understand that that's important in this economy, but why is this learning at this moment more important than the other things I could be doing, whether it's spending time with my kids, doing, sort of a project with my teammates, whatever it might be. And so I'm not gonna say there are no cases where it's gonna make sense to sort of pay for skills. But I think even more than paying for skills, it's creating a culture where learning is valued, and learning's valued in a learner-centric type of way, as opposed to do it so that the company can make, sort of greater profits or grow faster.
Can I?
Can I jump in and be a controversial back? So what I would say is that's true if your learners are primarily executives and have the luxury of choosing between spending time with their kids and maybe learning, right? But if you're, what I will agree with you about in terms of whether or not we should compensate people for their time, right? What I will absolutely agree about is that having an individualized approach to thinking about what is going to motivate one person and what needs to be in place, what needs to be true for one person to be successful versus another is going to be very different, right? So, and I think that's, when you think about, frontline worker, you're trying to put learning programs like the kinds of programs that Citi has, which literally is everybody from a frontline worker up through the most senior executive, right, has a learning option available to them, right? What needs to be true for those most senior executives is very, very different from that baseline person or that frontline person. We just did research actually that'll come out on November 7th, but we do an annual education index where we poll 2,000 employees in the United States. And what I will say is on the skills-based economy, workers get it. Employees are there. They understand that skills is the currency of employability, right? We are seeing that, over 70% understand that they need to be investing in skill development, meaning investing their time and even in some cases their own money in skill development. They're less worried about degree attainment and much more worried about skill development. And over 55% are worried, that they will become uncompetitive without skill development. So while we may not have caught up yet in terms of, discriminating pay based on skills, employees and workers are ready for it. They want it.
I totally agree. I think there's a principle in evolutionary biology which has been used in moments to think about business, but it's called the Red Queen's principle, and it's the evolution not of advancement but of parity. And the most sort of poignant, easy example is when social media came. So social media was a threat. It was a fear. Holy shit, you mean we're gonna let a 20-something in the marketing department say whatever they want and the whole world will be able to see it? And everyone was like, hell no, we're not. There was an enormous amount of risk and fear, but if you're PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, if PepsiCo jumps in and starts doing it, you no longer have a choice. If you're Coca-Cola, the choice is gone. You don't get to choose, you get to evolve or die. And so, Stephen, I believe what you're saying is true in this moment. So there's a recognition that what you're saying is true. But I also think that moment will be gone in a second. Because if you are, let's just play this out. Citibank starts paying based on skills. And Bank of America starts paying on skills. And Wells Fargo starts paying on skills. If you are JP Morgan Chase, you don't have a choice anymore. The choice is gone. I now am in the industry with a set of skills, and I can go to any of these employers who will pay me discerning on my skills, or I can go to this employer who, says, hey, do it for the cause. The choice will be gone. The rate at which this will happen in the world, it will feel like it happens overnight. Because as soon as, and we are on the cusp, the technology hasn't been there to discern skill at the accuracy and scale that we would be able to function this way. But with the democratization of AI, it is. We are on the cusp. The organizations will have this data tomorrow. They will be paying on it by Thursday. And once that comes, it will happen overnight. You will have no choice. And everyone will leap in, and we will be in a brave new world.
Someone has to have that conversation with the CFO first, though. So, Peter, imagine, your CFO, you're having this imaginary conversation, hypothetical conversation, hopefully not imaginary for long. And they say to you, citing research, McKinsey just came out with their State of the Workforce. They state that their research, which is too executive, shows 5% of employees deliver 95% of an organization's value. So if I'm your CFO, I'm like pointing at that and saying, and why should I pay everyone on skills? What would you say?
I think that what Dave was just touching on there is that we're moving into a space where we can measure the performance and the skills of people in all types of roles in a way that we've never been able to. Right now, I can go already and measure the NPS quality of someone on a call centre, how well they resolve something. But my boss can't really measure my skills in my role and what I'm doing very well. And I think that the kinds of inferences and the kinds of insights we're going to get just from following me in my workday, in how I'm interacting with the many systems that we interact with and communicating with people over those many systems, I think we're going to get to a space where we can get much more visibility in what I have and what I need. And I think what will happen then is the people that are the best will be rewarded accordingly, and the people that don't perform will not ultimately be working in those spaces. So we can what we try and do is make the tools, and we try to make the playing field for people that want it to play as level as possible. So we leverage all your systems here and many others to try and the best people...
Citibank gets around with SaaS vendors.
What's that? Yeah.
Everyone here, if you aren't a SaaS vendor and have Citibank business,
you can meet
come see
Peter for a drink
afterwards.
later today.
You're going to be a very popular guy at the bar. What I will say, though, is I would just distinguish between better, to your point, ways to pay for performance versus paying for skills. Developing a skills-based compensation system is extremely difficult. Any compensation system is extremely difficult. But the moment you get into, we're going to pay you if you develop this skill, that becomes a gamification question of how people spend their time and how they demonstrate skills, and is it equitable and is it objective, versus are we ultimately paying people for performance on the job in a more objective way than perhaps we have in the past. So we all agree that manager review processes aren't great today. So I think there's lots of opportunity for that improvement. I would be more concerned as a company about building learning into the culture in a way that is beneficial for individuals and for the organization.
Awesome.
I agree with that, yeah.
All right. All of you can join me in just thanking this awesome panel.